What does it take to be a great Isekai protagonist? Is it to be a person whisked to a world vastly different to one's own? Work with people of various upbringings and make the most of it? Is it standing back up, never giving up, despite knowing what you are getting into is more suffering? Or is it turning a new leaf and preventing the same mistakes from one's seedier past? Opportunities are laid out to live life anew, and any person would give anything to get that chance. For this one teenager, it's none of the above. He is not interested in living a slow life on a farm, becoming the best and reliable tool for someone else, or being the hero to save a country from financial ruin. His goal? Obtain unmatched power. Overwhelm the opponent with unrelenting force. While doing so, be just a nobody in a crowd without any of them knowing who he really is. That is the one singular goal being pursued by Cid Kagenou. So who is Cid Kagenou? What are his reasons for getting strong? Why does he prefer not to overtly flaunt his power? And where is he now in this other world? This one young boy and his crazy ideal will make a mark on this other world. No one will ever know who he is, but his presence would be felt like an approaching storm. And those who have witnessed the bite of his sword will come to quiver in fear. This is the story of Cid Kagenou. This is the story behind the Hunter of Shadows known as Shadow. Minoru Kagenou was a young boy living life as just another student at school. He appeared unremarkable and barely anyone noticed him. He blended perfectly in the background and no one ever thought of interacting with him. Hardly anyone paid attention to neither the grip strengthener on his hand nor the heavy weights on his wrists. He couldn't recall what put him on this path. He wasn't clear when it happened either. What he knew for sure was that this wasn't just a child's fever dream. It's what he always wanted. He would have a face of a normal, boring bystander within a crowd. A person hardly noticeable in a sea of more interesting people. When it was time to strike, he would turn into someone who interferes in conflicts and exert his great power from the shadows. An agent of chaos. An eminence in shadow. In his waking hours, would devote all his energy into this one singular purpose. At school, Minoru will act like an ordinary schoolboy while his classmates flock to the popular students in class. Outside school, he would train, build up his body, learn martial arts, all the while, learn to conceal these changes so no one would notice. He built his body to a point he looked very ripped and muscular, able to lift heavy weights with ease. But on the outside, he looked just like an ordinary boy. He spent a lot of time learning martial arts of various disciplines. From karate, judo, boxing, kendo to mixed martial arts, he would master all of these, opening him up to many ways to handle various fights at any time. This enabled him to be flexible and easily respond to any kind of combat scenario. He obsessed himself over training that he would try and test his improvements against random gangs of street thugs during his nightly jogs outside. Pitting himself against 20 or so ruffians with pipes, bats or knives wouldn't be called a sane way to test one's strength. And that's exactly what he did. Ultimately, these actions maintained his peak physical performance through his teenage years. One event exhibited the culmination of all his body training, the kidnapping of one of his classmates, a popular schoolgirl named Akane Nishino. A small-time gangoon took her for ransom and brought her to an abandoned warehouse. Before the criminal could have his way with her, Minoru jumped into the scene, wearing a balaclava mask. He immediately dispatched the creeper and engaged the bodyguard. This bodyguard, however, is a former soldier, a much more experienced combatant. Minoru may have had a hard time but emerged victorious after defeating the army veteran with his 2 crowbars. This incident might have been a win for Minoru, but this exposed his limitations. Even though he had great physical prowess, he wouldn't last long against an army of trained soldiers like the veteran. He wasn't bulletproof. A nuclear strike could easily end him as well. With that, he sought to further strengthen himself, dabbling into religious practices to elevate his body and mind. Sadly, he struggled in getting close to transcendence. He metaphorically hit a wall in this regard, but in his desperate bid to obtain magic, he would hit his head on a large boulder over and over again. High off his adrenaline, he made a mad scramble out of the forest clearing and into an incoming truck. The moment Minoru opened his eyes, his now Cid Kagenou, a child born into the Kagenou family. This noble family is known to be home of the best dark knights in the Kingdom of Midgar. Realizing that he's reincarnated into another world, he also discovered magic exists in it as well, opening him up to being able to realize his lifelong dream of becoming a shadow broker. All his childhood days were spent in training in the way of the sword in preparation for Midgar Academy. Combining his past experience in various fight disciplines in his old world and the sword style of this world, he created a fierce combat style that made the other world's prominent sword art utterly unrefined. Under everyone's noses, he personally studied how to use magic. With his innate talent for sensing mana, he would effortlessly understand this world's magic casting and harness the power within. Even when he was just a baby, he was able to sense magic, making it easier for him to understand magic at a faster pace. Still maintaining his side character persona in public, he walked in the shadows of his older sister Claire, who's going to be the heir of House Kagenou. He supported his sister from the sidelines, keeping his level of skill second-rate to his talented sister's level. While this would upset the old sister, thinking of him being weak and lacking in improvement, he reined in his power in order to prevent eclipsing his sibling, otherwise he might expose his true capabilities and become the protagonist. The only ones privileged enough to bear witness of his true capabilities were none other than bandits. Like what he did in his previous world, Cid tested his skills on unsuspecting bandits around his area. Sadly, not one stood a chance, and no one lived long enough to tell the tale. Up to this point, Cid learned how to manipulate mana so well that he developed a new slime material that is superconductive to magic. The special material would react to the magic user's thoughts and would take the form of whatever the user wished. Cid's arsenal was predominantly made of this impossible material. He could make the most durable armor or the deadliest weapon at a snap of a thought. Magic, to Cid, is like small luminous balls of energy, ripe to be harnessed and mold to what he wished. This talent was incredibly rare, and there are no known magic users or spellsword capable of the feat Cid's had done with magic. That's how formidable Cid had become at a very young age. At this point, Cid was very much on his way to becoming the shadow broker he always wanted to be. And what is a shadow broker without his own organization of agents to carry out his will? That started at one fateful bandit raid when he stumbled upon a hideous creature among the spoils in the bandit camp. Noticing the creature was suffering from being overcharged with mana, he picked up the thing and went to do experiments on it. In that process, he happened to figure out how to fix what was ailing the creature. What came out of it was something he did not expect. The ugly creature turned into a young elf girl. When the elf came to, he weaved a tale on how he cured her curse and who were responsible for her suffering. Thanks to a bottle of hard liquor, Cid pinned the blame on the cult of Diablos, a shadowy organization bent on controlling the world and reviving the demon lord they worship, Diablos. Cid recruited the cured elf and named her Alpha. Thus, Shadow Garden is born. It did not take long before Shadow Garden had 6 more members, slowly and surely growing their ranks. All 6 of them were saved by Shadow from the curse that befell on Alpha and trained under the supervision of Shadow to be skilled warriors. In time, they would split off with their master to recruit more into the fold and gain influence for the benefit of Shadow Garden. Shadow left them to their devices, appreciative that they've been playing with his fantasies for this long. While Cid thought this was just all roleplay for his toony fantasies, a shadow war is about to come ahead and he would be the one to spearhead whether he was aware of it or not. Things came to a head when Cid turned 15 and enrolled into the Royal Midgar Academy, the same school his sister Claire was training to be a Dark Knight. Another chapter had begun for him. Instead of quietly coursing through his academy training while being an average student, he got dragged into a betrothal affair between Alexia Midgar, the most popular schoolgirl, and Zenon Griffey, the academy sword instructor. He endured being the princess's fake boyfriend for a time in a vain attempt to irritate Zenon. Cid, of course, was bribed with gold coins as compensation. He was in need of funding to continue his shadow activities and so bit down his pride and went along with it. Finally, he didn't have to suffer any longer when he had a falling out with Alexia. Their charade had come to an end. Cid could resume being a boring normie student once again. Or so he thought. The royal guard surrounded and pulled him out of school for questioning. Alexia never came back home after their last date and no one found her since. Cid is the last person that had seen her and is now a suspect for her disappearance. This might have been a terrible situation for Cid, but this opened up for him to exercise his other talent, being a weak side character. He endured the guard interrogations. Even if the guards resorted to torturing him for answers, he would act like the most pathetic wimp to really sell his helplessness. After the guards were through with him, Cid was thrown out of the precinct, battered and bruised. He then just gingerly walked back home like he never sustained wounds from the interrogation. At the peak of the conflict, only then Shadow would showcase his might. His weak, defenseless demeanor, only a facade to keep eyes off him. The element of surprise, always by his side. To him, all this was just an open world for him to be a shadow broker, and he would eliminate all those who stood in his way. That's what the cult of Diablos would experience when they decided to kidnap Alexia. Chaos erupted in the city when the agents of Shadows simultaneously assaulted all of the cult's hideouts all throughout the capital. This took them by surprise and severely interfered with their operations. Alexia was freed from her captivity thanks to the demon behemoth destroying her restraints. Her escape in the sewers was cut short when her betrothed, Zenon, stood at the middle of her path. Alexia engaged Zenon to continue her escape, but the sword instructor was too much for her. Before Zenon could reclaim her, Shadow appears. The man clad in black. A huge thorn on the cult's side. Zenon scoffed at Shadow's presence. Mostly what Shadow had engaged with were the weaker sect of the cult. Now Shadow was fighting the stronger members, and it wouldn't be as easy. Shadow remained unimpressed. It didn't matter who he faced. The result would still be the same. Zenon threw strike after strike, releasing high magical energy, showing how much power he had. Despite all that, Shadow stood, unwavering. All of Zenon's attacks effortlessly blocked. Whatever that red demonic aura he exuded didn't faze Shadow at all. Shadow just toyed with him, not hurting him with his sword but with unarmed melee strikes. Try as Zenon might, even with manic flurries of strikes, Shadows parried them all. Even ingesting demonic pills, an eldritch concoction that immensely increases an individual's power, failed at tipping the scale against Shadow. No road exists for those using borrowed power. A purple field enveloped the surroundings around Shadow and the demon Zenon. Shadow had one wish, to withstand a nuclear bomb. He developed his body, mind and perfected his skills. However, there were heights he could yet attain. After years of training and meditation, he only arrived at one single solution. In order to prevent getting vaporized by nuclear hellfire, he had to become the nuke himself. Shadow had made his mark in the world of Midgar, exhibiting his immense power. The cult's presence was now made aware due to Shadow's actions. This evil organization had to tread carefully as it's now at the crosshairs of a formidable foe. Slowly, this cult's identity would be unraveled. With the cult's influence stifled, Shadow Garden switched focus to gain more influence, make connections, and funding in order to maintain their operations. Alongside that, unearth the origins of the cult of Diablos to better understand the demon possession these agents were cured from. Their great leader had imparted to them his wisdom and experience, and they'd surely put them to good use, making Shadow Garden grow exponentially. In time, they would be more than just a thorn, but a greater threat against this demonic organization known as the cult of Diablos. Cid would be oblivious to all the machinations within Shadow Garden as he only focused on himself. As far as he was aware, him being a shadow broker was a solo affair. He only thought that his followers were just playing along with his toony roleplay and thought nothing more of it. Would he ever realize that his fantasy was indeed the reality? Or would he stay ignorant while important things happen around him? Only he would ultimately know the answer. But for now, this has been the story of Cid Kagenou and his covert rise to prominence. This is the story of the shadow broker known as Shadow. Thank you for watching Isekai Dork. A quick reminder to click like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more Isekai lore and weapon breakdowns.